Welcome friends, it is I, your LostScarf, and it's time for the beginner guide to Bastet. So the format we're going to do here is we're going to be doing just mostly information for beginners so they can get better at Bastet, and then they'll figure things out on their own, how to do the more advanced stuff. So we don't want to overload with too much advanced stuff, but there will be a little bit in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell you about Bastet, tell you about her abilities, tell you the do's and don'ts with her, Conquest, how to play her, Arena, how to play her, items that work well with her, counters to her, and a good summary to just really go over everything that's great about her. So, let's get going! So who is Bastet? Well, the Hello Kitty goddess is the daughter of Ra and the sister of Anhur. She's the goddess of women and of cats, so she's a cat girl god. She plays just like a cat, pouncing in, attacking your targets very quickly with a big burst of damage, and which will gravely wound them or kill them, and after that she can just finish them off with a basic attack, then jump right back out, so she's very quick for hit and runs like a cat. This kitty will scratch your itch hard, and not in a good way. So let's go over Bastet's abilities. First up is her passive, Open Wound. When Bastet hits an opponent with a non-ult ability, they are opened up for the next 3 seconds to take 15% additional damage from the next ability that comes out of Bastet. So my advice here is to use Razor Whip as your second damaging ability every time. You hit them with Pounce or Declawed first, then hit them with Razor Whip. If you miss something, use the other ability and then hit with Razor Whip. But always have Razor Whip as your second one because it does the most damage out of her abilities, so that extra 15% is very good to take advantage of. Her first ability is Pounce. Now this is a leap that goes over terrain, does a good amount of damage, but what's important about it is 4 seconds within jumping, you can jump back to your starting position. So you can jump in, burst out all your abilities, and then jump right back out. It's really good for hit and run tactics. One thing to keep in mind though is if you are crippled or hard CC'd, you can't jump back. So keep that in mind when jumping into things. Bastet's Razor Whip is a wide cone attack that does 4 ticks of damage over time. If done correctly, you can actually get an entire minion line with it, and you can actually wipe them out at the higher levels, which is very useful for that. As I said before, it is recommended that you use this as your second hitting ability in your combos because it does the most damage out of all of her abilities. Bastet's third ability is called Declawed. It's a skill shot that splashes wherever it lands, and it slows victims by 30% for 2 seconds. You should use this to start your passive, or with Pounce with the Razor Whip as a second hit. Bastet's ultimate is called Cat Call, and she summons 3 cats for 10 seconds that slow targets by 20% when they hit them and do damage. They will target enemies under the effect of Bastet's Razor Whip, then closest targets if there is no one with Razor Whip on them. Cats can body block as well, which is very useful there. Something important to know though is cats are kinda slow, so they can be easily outrun by opponents. So it's best to use them close up or after use Declawed to slow down an opponent. Bastet in Conquest. Now, Bastet can be played as a jungler or as a solo lane god, but for beginners she's definitely better for jungler. Solo does take some work to get to, so don't go for that as a beginner. Now, because I recommend jungler for beginners, you should refer to the jungle guide for a lot of good information on how to play a jungler, which will help you out in the long run just for any jungler in general. Now, the first half of the match, you should treat Bastet as a physical caster. She has very strong abilities, so you should be giving her a lot of cooldown and mana to take advantage of that, and only be going after your opponents when you have all your abilities ready. This includes your ultimate. You should be farming up whenever possible, and then ganking every time your ultimate's off cooldown, and you should be able to either get a kill or keep a lane healthy every time you go to a lane for ganking. The second half of the match though is, her abilities will fall off as the match goes on, so you have to start building into basic attacks. For this, you're going to want items that have attack speed, critical, lifesteal, and pen, so you can soften your opponents with your abilities and then finish them off with your basic attacks. Your job as a jungler with Bastet is to keep your opponents down as much as possible, and you do this either by killing them or making them go back to base to keep your team better farmed than they are. So that's what you're going to be doing the entire game through. Something important to keep in mind is you can actually use your cats to tank towers. So if a tower is low on HP or an opponent is low on HP, you can have your cats tank the tower shots and finish off the tower or finish off an opponent and then get the heck out of there. So do's and don'ts with Bastet. So here's some do's. With Bastet, you want to have your Razor Whip attack on an opponent you want to kill. That way when you do your ultimate with your cats, they will go after that opponent. If no target has bleeding on them, the cats will just go whatever's closest, and that might not always be your target. Another do is use your Razor Whip to clear minion lines. You should be able to take out an entire minion line for the most part with your Razor Whip. Archers for sure will go down, and it will weaken the melees pretty strongly. If it does not kill them, a basic attack or 2 will finish them off. Unless they're the big ones. The big ones, of course, will take longer. Another do is to not forget that you should always hit Razor Whip as your second ability on an opponent after you've hit them with Pounce or Declawed. That way you can take full advantage of your passive. Now, Bastet has a lot of combos, and we're going to display them on the screen in number form. The thing you just always want to keep in mind is no matter what you do, you should always have Razor Whip as the second ability that hits an opponent. And it's up to you whether you want to use Pounce to open a combo, or to save it for escapes, or to jump on an opponent if they escape first. Now, an advanced tactic you should do when you get better at the game is you can use Bastet's Pounce with Hog to steal camps. Done correctly, you can cause real bad troubles for your opponents at the beginning of the game. Now, of course, a don't is to not use Decloud or Pounce as your second hit unless you don't have a choice because you missed something or you just hit with the Razor Whip first. It's better to do damage than not, of course. A very important don't is to not pounce into a CC heavy group. They will kill you because they'll stun you and you won't be able to jump back. You will die. Lastly, don't waste your cats on opponents who have not used their escapes yet. Your cats will come out and they'll just jump away and then your cats will become useless. So how should you be building Bastet? Well, at the start you should have, of course, a Bomba's Mask with Hog level 1 or 2 and potions. Don't get red potion, get green and blue. This would be good for sustainability because she's so squishy early on. Red potion, she can do damage, but she will die. Next you should get Ninja Tabi and Yotan's Wrath for all the cooldown, the penetration, and the mana on it, and some power for it, so that you can do a lot of damage pretty early on. You'll be a very strong caster with Bastet at the start, and eventually you should go into some sort of lifesteal. Devourer's Gauntlets or Aussie. Aussie if you're behind because it's so cheap. Gauntlet if you're ahead, because if you're ahead you'll be able to farm well and get the stacks very quickly. After that, it depends on how tanky your opponents are. If you have very strong physical protection opponents, Executioner to cut that down. If they don't have a lot of protection, you should go for Quinn's Size. Take advantage of your Guardian opponent's high HP, and just anyone's HP in general, and just do a lot of damage to them using the Size, and eventually the other one. Finally, you should cap it off with a Deathbringer. Deathbringer just adds a good amount of oomph at the end of the whole thing, giving you a 20% crit chance. With Devourer's Gauntlets, you do above 700 damage. With Aussie, you do around 600 damage. So it's pretty good as a capper there. And if your opponents never build any defense, which is weird, but it does happen, you could always go with another crit item instead of Executioner. Now, if your opponents have a ton of CC, like a lot of Guardians are just stunned and something like that, you can go for Magi's Blessing and replace something else. I would say probably replace the Executioner if you have to. That way you can get in and get out a little bit better. Don't have to worry about Guardians so much because you got this to be against their stun while you're working on the squishier god instead. But let's say you're dealing with just a lot of problems that you just don't know what to deal with, and you want to be able to just pounce, do something, get the heck out, and you only think you can do one basic attack. Well, then you should get Hi-Rez Lament. If you're not going to do a lot of basic attacks, Hi-Rez Lament's good because you'll jump in, do a bunch of abilities, hurt them really bad with the Hi-Rez Lament's passive damage, and then jump back out. So that's a good idea there. Lastly is Shifter's Shield. Now, if you're not really dealing with a lot of CC, but a lot of damage, the defensive Shifter's Shield will keep you alive pretty well, and also just the damage bonus from the passives, plus the 40 physical power from the Shifter's Shield really does a lot of damage to your opponents, so there's a lot of options there. Finally, actives, since you open with Hog, you should probably get Fist of the Gods. To stun an opponent, keep them there, and beat them to death. You can also get Girdle of Support, which can be used to give your teammates power and your cats power if you don't cast it prior. Mathematically, it does more to give your cats power if you cast it before setting out your cats. Weakening Curse can be used as well to keep your opponents in place so you can beat them to death with your cats better after they've used an escape if they have one. And finally, you have beads that you can use if you want to jump in and not worry about getting caught. You can just use beads and jump right back out. It's really good for sticky situations if you feel like you're going to get in a lot of trouble. And this is a pretty good build across the board that you can use in Conquest and Arena, and when you get better at the game, you can think of ways you can vary it up, but this should work out for you very well. Now, Bastet in Arena should be played kind of like she is in Conquest. You should be building her as a physical cast in the first half, and then as a basic attack god in the second half. In the first half, you'll be doing a lot of harassment with hit-and-run tactics with your pouncing abilities, and trying to finish off squishy gods if possible, or anyone who's just low on HP. The second half, you'll be softening with your abilities, and finishing off with basic attacks instead. But be mindful when you're jumping around that you do not want to get caught by a Guardian ever, because once a Guardian stuns you with something, the rest of the team will converge and kill you horribly. So just play smart, play quick, be very careful, and you'll do well. So what counters Bastet? Well, the first one to think about is Sprint. Because Bastet's only CCs are slows, Sprint can completely ignore that and they'll just get away from her and her cats. Walking Aegis also works well against Bastet because she doesn't have a stun, so she shouldn't get the standstill one, they should get the walking one. And so Bastet can burst in under 2 seconds. Aegis lasts that long, so they can ignore all of her damage and just get away from her. Another problem for Bastet is Cripple. Bastet can just jump in and Cripple will be on her and she can't go anywhere and she'll probably get beaten to death. In general, Guardians are also a counter to her because they all have hard CCs, which can prevent her pounce and also keep her cats down, so she can't really do too much. Now, a hard counter to her is Loki. Loki has invisibility, which means her cats will not go after him. He has a decoy, which the cats will go for, and Loki does have the ability to burst down and kill Bastet just as quickly as she can kill him, and so that makes him a pretty good counter to her. Another good counter is Nuwa. Her invisibility from her fog will make it that cats can't go after her. She can also stun Bastet pretty well. She has a cage ultimate that can slow down her and her cats so they never catch up to Nuwa. And of course she has body blocking with her minions. So as with any god, you should keep your weaknesses in mind when playing so that you don't make too many mistakes. So in summary, Bastet is a very bursty god. She's a physical cast the first half. She's all about the hit and run, killing people with her abilities or finishing them off with a basic attack after they've been weakened hardly by her abilities. And later in the game, when she falls off on her abilities, she can beat them to death using just her basic attacks because she can be built very strongly for that. Something you should keep in mind is all of Bastet's abilities minus her ultimate have 100% scaling, which means whatever power you get from items will also be the power you get extra on your abilities. So that makes her very strong in that respect. Jump around, be smart about what you do, and you should just cause a lot of trouble for your opponents and get a lot of kills. So that's it for the Bastet guide. Up next is going to be Athena, and as always, if you want to join in the discussion, you can come by at 7 p.m. PST -8 GMT at Scarf Plays on Twitch on Friday nights. See you then!